If you're a veteran watching this right now, I need you to hear something. Something that should have been said to you 50 years ago. Something that's been missing from every conversation about your service. Something that you've earned but never received. And if you're not a veteran, I need you to understand what these men went through. Not the movie version, not the history book version, the real version. Because this story isn't just about war. It's about what happens when a country asks everything from its young men and then turns its back on them when they come home.
This is for every veteran who came home to silence instead of gratitude. For every soldier who hid their medals because wearing them meant facing hatred. For every man who survived the jungle only to fight a different war at home. This message is 50 years overdue, but it needs to be said, and it needs to be heard. You were 19 years old when your country called you. Some of you enlisted. Most of you were drafted. A letter arrived in the mail and your life stopped being yours. You didn't get to choose. You didn't get to decide if this war was right or wrong. You just had to go. And you went, because that's what your country asked you to do. They shipped you to a place most Americans couldn't find on a map, Vietnam, a country on the other side of the world where the jungle was so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in front of you, where the heat was so oppressive you thought you might die from it before the enemy ever got to you, where every step could trigger a mine, where every shadow could hide a soldier who wanted you dead. You were just kids, 18, 19, 20 years old. Your friends back home were going to college, going to parties, living normal lives, and you were carrying a rifle through a jungle, watching your friends die, trying to survive one more day, just one more day, and then another, and another, for 12 months if you were lucky, longer if you weren't.
The things you saw in Vietnam don't leave you. They're not memories you can pack away and forget. They're permanent, burned into your mind. Your best friend stepping on a mine. The medic who couldn't save him. The 19-year-old kid who died calling for his mother. The villages where you couldn't tell who was friendly and who wanted to kill you. The firefights where everything happened so fast you didn't have time to think. You just reacted. You survived. And you carried the weight of that survival.
Some of you earned medals. Purple Hearts for the wounds you took. Bronze Stars for courage under fire. Silver Stars for actions that saved lives. You did things that in any other war would have made you a national hero. You pulled wounded soldiers out of firefights. You held positions when retreating would have been easier. You sacrificed parts of yourself, physically and mentally, to keep your brothers alive. You were heroes. By any definition, by any standard, you were heroes. But when you came home, nobody called you that.
You stepped off the plane in California expecting something. Not parades, maybe. You weren't naive. But something. Some acknowledgement that you'd spent a year in hell. That you'd done your duty. That you'd survived. What you got instead was spit. Protesters at the airport calling you baby killers. Calling you murderers. People who'd never been to war. Who'd never seen combat. Who'd never had to make the impossible choices you made. And they were spitting on you, on soldiers, on men who just spent 12 months fighting for their lives.
You came home and you didn't talk about it. Because what was the point? Nobody wanted to hear about Vietnam. Nobody wanted to hear about what you went through, The country had decided the war was wrong, and somehow that meant the soldiers were wrong too. So you buried it. You took off your uniform and you tried to become normal. Tried to fit back into a society that didn't want you. You looked for work and saw the way employers looked at you when they saw Vietnam on your application. You saw the hesitation, the judgment, the fear that you were damaged, that you were dangerous, that hiring you was a risk. Some of you couldn't find work at all. Some of you ended up homeless, living on the streets, invisible, forgotten.
You went to the VA for help and found a system that was overwhelmed and underfunded, that made you wait months for appointments, that denied your disability claims, that treated you like you were trying to scam the system instead of like men who'd sacrificed everything for their country. You needed help, and the help wasn't there. You tried to explain to your families what you were going through, the nightmares, the flashbacks, the way loud noises sent you right back to the jungle, the way you couldn't be in crowds, the way you were always scanning for threats that weren't there. But they didn't understand. They couldn't understand. And after a while, you stopped trying to explain. You just carried it alone.
Some of you turned to alcohol because it was the only thing that quieted the noise in your head, the only thing that let you sleep without dreaming about the war. Some of you pushed people away because it was easier than letting them see how broken you were. Some of you didn't make it at all. The statistics are devastating. Thousands of Vietnam veterans took their own lives after coming home. Thousands of men who survived the war but couldn't survive the peace. But here's what I need the world to understand. Here's what makes this story not just tragic, but also triumphant.
Despite all of that, despite the hatred, despite the lack of support, despite the nightmares and the pain and the feeling that nobody cared, despite every single obstacle that was put in your way, you survived. You built lives. You raised families. You went to work every single day carrying weight that would have crushed most people, and you did it with dignity. You became fathers, and you loved your children, even though part of you was still in Vietnam. You taught them right from wrong. You showed up to their games and their graduations. You tried to give them the childhood you lost. You tried to be present, even when the ghosts made it hard.
You became husbands, and you loved your wives even though you couldn't always show it the way you wanted to. Even though the emotional walls you built to survive the war made intimacy difficult, you stayed. You committed. You built partnerships that lasted decades despite the challenges. You worked jobs that didn't appreciate you, that underpaid you, that never knew what you'd done or what you'd sacrificed. And you showed up anyway, day after day, year after year. You provided for your families. You paid your bills. You did the ordinary things that required extraordinary strength, given what you carried. You became grandfathers, and you got to see the next generation grow up in a country that you helped preserve, even though that country didn't thank you for it, even though you never got the recognition you deserved. You still took pride in watching your grandchildren live free lives, lives that were possible because of what you endured. And somewhere along the way, you became something else too. You became symbols. Not to the country at large, not to the people who should have recognized you, but to each other. You found other veterans, men who understood without you having to explain,
men who carried the same weight. And you formed bonds that were stronger than anything else in your lives. Brothers, not by blood, but by experience, by shared trauma, by the understanding that only comes from going through hell together. You showed the next generation of veterans how to survive after war. When the Gulf War veterans came home, when Iraq and Afghanistan veterans came home, they looked to you. They saw men who'd been through the worst welcome home any generation of soldiers ever received. And somehow you survived it. Somehow you built lives. Somehow you kept going. You became the example, the proof that it's possible to carry the weight and still live. And slowly, very slowly, things started to change. The country started to realize what it had done to you, started to understand that you could oppose a war without hating the warriors, started to recognize that you deserved better. It took decades. It took way too long, but the recognition started to come.
People started saying thank you for your service, started treating veterans with the respect they should have always received, started understanding that the men who went to Vietnam didn't make the political decisions. They just answered when their country called. And they paid a price that most people can't comprehend. But here's what I need to say directly to the veterans watching this. What I need you to hear. What should have been said to you in 1969, 1970, 1971. What should have been said every single day since then, but wasn't. Thank you.
Thank you for going when your country called, even though you didn't choose to go. Thank you for serving, even though you knew the country was divided about the war. Thank you for doing your duty when it would have been easier to run, to hide, to refuse. Thank you for keeping your brothers alive, for pulling wounded soldiers out of firefights, for holding positions under impossible odds, for making split-second decisions that saved lives, for being brave when everything inside you was screaming to be afraid. Thank you for coming home and trying to build normal lives, even though nothing felt normal anymore. Thank you for not giving up, even when giving up would have been understandable. Thank you for surviving, when survival required superhuman strength. Thank you for raising your children with love, even though you were fighting your own demons. Thank you for being fathers and husbands and grandfathers, even though the war made emotional connection difficult. Thank you for showing up, for staying, for being present, even when being present was painful. Thank you for carrying your pain quietly so your families wouldn't have to carry it. Thank you for going to work every day, even when getting out of bed felt impossible. Thank you for functioning in a world that didn't understand what you were going through. Thank you for not becoming bitter, for not letting the hatred you received turn you into hateful people, for maintaining your humanity even though the war and the homecoming tried to strip it away. Thank you for being examples to younger veterans, for showing them that survival is possible, that you can carry the weight and still build meaningful lives, that brotherhood transcends time and distance and everything else. And I'm sorry. The world owes you an apology that most of you never received. I'm sorry that you came home to spit instead of gratitude. I'm sorry that you were blamed for a war you didn't start.
I'm sorry that you had to hide your service instead of being proud of it. I'm sorry that you carried your pain alone for so long. I'm sorry that the help you needed wasn't there when you needed it. I'm sorry that it took decades for the country to recognize what you sacrificed. You deserved better. You deserved to come home to a grateful nation. You deserved support and care and recognition. You deserved to have your service honored instead of hidden. And the fact that you didn't get those things is one of the great shames of American history.
But here's what you did get. You got each other. You got the bonds that formed in the jungle and lasted a lifetime. You got the knowledge that when everything was on the line, you didn't break. You survived. You persevered. You built lives worth living despite every obstacle. You got to know something that most people never learn. You learned what real courage looks like. Not the absence of fear, but moving forward despite the fear. Doing what needs to be done even when the cost is everything. Surviving even when survival seems impossible. You learned what brotherhood really means. Not just friendship, not just camaraderie, but the bond that forms when you die for the person next to you and they die for you. When you carry each other's pain, when you understand without words. That kind of bond is rare. It's precious, and it's something that civilians can never fully understand. And you learned that you're stronger than you ever thought possible. You survived a war. You survived coming home to a hostile nation. You survived decades of carrying pain that most people can't imagine. You survived, and that survival is its own kind of victory. To every Vietnam veteran watching this, your service mattered. What you did mattered. The sacrifices you made mattered. The friends you lost mattered. The pain you carried mattered. You mattered. You still matter. Your children and grandchildren are proud of you even if they don't know how to say it. Your fellow veterans understand in ways that words can't express. And the younger generation of veterans who came after you look at you with respect and gratitude because you paved the way. You showed them it's possible to survive the unsurvivable. You are heroes, not because the government gave you medals, not because the country threw parades, but because you did what heroes do. You sacrificed, you served, you suffered, and you survived. You kept going when everything told you to quit. You built lives when it would have been easier to give up. You maintained your dignity when the world tried to take it from you. That's what heroes do. They don't need recognition to be heroic. They don't need parades to know their worth. They just do what needs to be done. And then they keep living, keep fighting, keep surviving. So this is the message the world needs to hear. This is what should have been said 50 years ago. This is what needs to be said now and every day forward. To every Vietnam veteran, thank you. We see you. We honor you. We recognize your sacrifice, and we're sorry it took so long to say it. Your service will never be forgotten. Your sacrifices will never be diminished. Your courage will never be questioned. You came home to a broken welcome, but you're leaving behind a lasting legacy. A legacy of strength, of perseverance, of
brotherhood, of doing what's right even when the world doesn't appreciate it. That legacy matters. You matter. Welcome home, brothers. Welcome home.